So our forefathers had mixed feelings. They came from Russia, and they had memories and stuff like that, but then they were impoverished there and discriminated against and killed every so often. Pogroms goes way back into the 1700s and 1800s, where they gathered the Jews and killed them. So you can imagine that the Jewish population wanted to come to this new country where there was freedom and no pogroms.
So when did your family come over? Was it your grandparents or your parents?
Early 1900s. My father was born maybe in 1888 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And he came over when he was about 18 to 20, something like that. We never knew his age because they didn't have birth certificates and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But he came over. But my mother, her parents came over also. But my mother was born in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
She was not an emigre. She was a U.S. citizen from birth. She was the oldest in her family and the firstborn. Morris and Esther just got here, and she was born. So she was born a U.S. citizen. The others had to get citizenship, pass the tests and stuff like that. So my mother was born here, and that was an achievement, born in the U.S.
So how did your father get here?
My father and his brother came over together. He had an older brother, Dave, who was a little more educated than him. My father was the fighter. He had quite a few fights. And David was a little more educated. My cousin Myrna, who was Dave and Beatty's, one of their daughters, she and I were pretty much the same age, and we used to hang out together, Myrna and I. Her brother, and she had a brother, Albert, and Seymour. Albert went to the Army, Seymour went to the Navy during the war. Albert was killed by a buzz bomb. And that was quite a tragedy. And Murray and I hung out together after she found out that her brother was killed in the war. He was killed by this new weapon of Germany's, buzz bombs. And his plane was hit. He was a gunner on an airplane, a rear gunner. He had been a pilot, but he had done some head shopping, so they flunked him out. So then he became a tail gunner, which was the worst position on a plane at that time in the war. And that plane was hit by a buzz bomb, which was a new weapon. Just a bomb that they shot, and it just flew at the planes and stuff. It's a new weapon that Germany, Nazi Germany came up with.
So how else did the war affect growing up?
Say that again?
How did World War II affect the way you grew up?
Oh, well, that was, World War II was chief key, because World War II was associated with the extermination of Jews. They killed 6 million Jews. Think of it, 6 million Jews. in the pogroms just before the Second World War. And during the Second World War, they would gather the Jews together in concentration camps, and then they would take them to ovens. You know about that?
Mm-hmm.
Can you imagine that? That they take a people, an ethnic group, and would burn them up in incinerators?
Mm-hmm.
They killed 6 million Jews. 6 million in the Second World War, and before the Second World War. And there were a couple of stories. We had some relatives, or I don't know who they were, but one guy, one Jewish guy, went back to the town where the teacher had was cruel and mistreated the Jewish kids. But one of these Jewish kids, now grown up and a soldier, went back to that town and, we understand, beat the teacher up. Something like that. Some story like that. And of course we liked that story.
So I know when we talked to Grandma, she had mentioned that like seeing photos from World War II made her like hide being Jewish. Like, do you feel like that happened with you?
No. Though there was a neighborhood in Brooklyn that it was a library, but we had to pass through this neighborhood that was anti-Semitic. So when I came through, they wanted to beat me. I said, I'm not Jewish. It wasn't a good idea to be Jewish going through that neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
So we had to hide it sometimes. There was a couple of neighborhoods like that. And there was anti-Semitism during those years.
That must have been really tough.
Yeah, that was bad. But of course, the Jewish population in the United States prospered.
Yes.
And became very achievement-oriented and done well in the United States. Their coming to the United States was a good idea.
Yes.
It worked out well for them.
So, weren't your... I think I heard a story before about how your father and his brother were running away, and that's why they came to the U.S.?
Yeah. They ran away from, well, my father and his brother, they passed out leaflets against the Tsar. Mm. So they had to get the hell out of the country before they got caught.
Mm-hmm.
What were the leaflets about?
It was protests against the Tsar.
Was there any Zionism in it, in the leaflets, or was it they're communist, or were they just anti-Tsar?
Don't know. I don't think the communists were a factor at that time. Not at that time. It's before the communists. So they had to get out fast. So they had to cross Europe. From Russia, they had to get all across Europe, get over to France to get boats to the U.S. So you can imagine what that was like.
Did they go together?
I think they did. Dave and Herman.
I remember you telling a story where you said that he was the one who was passing stuff out, and he got his name on the list, and he had to use his brother's identification in order to get out.
Yes.
But wasn't his brother Dave, or was that another brother?
No, that would be David.
So there's a little contradictory in those stories.
Well, that's because of stories. You don't expect them to be accurate, do you?
So what were your parents' names?
Herman and Bertha.
Herman and Bertha.
Herman and Bertha. And my mother's family were unhappy with her hooking up with Herman, because Herman was an emigre. He wasn't from the United States, and Bertha was. And they were not happy with that union, because they looked down on my father because he could not read and write English well enough. He was not educated.
But didn't they immigrate too?
Well, yeah, but my mother's generation, her sister became a teacher, brother became a lawyer, so, and her other brother became a pharmacist, but he died at 21.
Oh.
And my mother, well, my mother didn't get too educated. She went to 10th grade, and she married this foreigner, this immigrant who couldn't speak English too well.
So your uncle who died at 21, how did he die?
He got one of those diseases that were current at that time. I think diphtheria, something like that. So he died at early 21. He was a pharmacist.
What about your mother? Did she work?
My mother did work in an office for a little while. She went to the 10th grade.
Mm-hmm.
And she worked for a little while until she met my father, and they got married. And my father was looked down on by my mother's family because he was a foreigner, which they all were, not all of them, but her generation was more educated.
Right.
Her sister became a teacher, and her brother became a lawyer. And the other brother became a pharmacist, though he died at 21. So education was important. But my mother married a non-educated guy. So he was looked down on. But they sort of needed him because he was a plumber.
Right.
And he could fix things in the house. And he would all often fix things that they needed fixed. So they depended on him on some things, though they looked down on him because she married a foreigner and she was American born. And of course, and this was not good, they would, I don't know how they did this, but my father was the one who, bought a bungalow up in the Catskills and stuff like that, and then built 3 more bungalows. So we had a little community, but there was no water to swim in. But my relatives would stay at my father's bungalows. They would pay him for the rent that he usually would get. And they would have meetings where they would criticize my father. And I was very upset at that. I was too young to get in the way of that, but I didn't like my mother allowing that, and she allowed it. So they were critical of him. but they used his resources one way or another. But they were critical of him because he wasn't educated and he had periods where he was broke and he had to go to them for loans to get some money to live on. He did better as he got older, and he was able to pay off the houses he bought. He always was buying houses or building something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he built houses in Brooklyn and stuff. But he owed money, and he had to borrow money from my mother's family. And that wasn't too good. But later on, the houses got paid off, and my mother had 7 or 8 houses free and clear, which she collected rent from.
Yeah, that's a lot of houses.
And that's what supported her. So when he died, she had a means of support. Besides, when he was alive, he would supposedly drive 40 miles to do a $2 plumbing job. If you can imagine. But he was a plumber, so he could, that was his trade, and he would work as a plumber. But he also bought houses, which he collected rent from, which I collected rent. My brother and I, we both went and collected rents.
How old were you when you would go collect rent?
18, 19. I would go to the apartments, knock on the door, and say, I've come for the rent. And sometimes they say, we don't have it. I'll be back. Sometimes it didn't happen. Sometimes stories are my father helped out the families when they needed some food on the table, stuff like that. He was the entrepreneur. He's the one who owned buildings.
Mm-hmm.
Him in the bank. Him in the bank. They didn't know how much money he owed. In the end, the houses got paid off, and they supported my mother when he died. That's what she lived on. Yeah. So he left her enough to live on when he died, which was good. Or else we would have taken care of her, imagine. Though I wasn't working at the time.
When were you not working?
One year, at 19, I did nothing for the summer. Absolutely nothing. I didn't get a part-time job or anything. The summers before that, my Uncle Abe usually got jobs for me. So I'd have a summer job. But one year, at 19, I didn't do anything, which wasn't right, of course. I was 19 already.